What are asset declarations and why are they an important tool in fighting corruption? Asset declarations are essentially a document that lists out the assets and liabilities of public and elected officials. These lists can entail property of any kind, real estate, bank account balances, and any other investments and debts that officials incur. So the point of having these asset declarations is that it enables a level of transparency that allows us to hold officials accountable. There's transparency about their financial situations and their financial dealings, which allows us to find out and track any unchecked gains in wealth, any unexplained gains in wealth, especially during their tenure and their term and their elected term. When an official is elected or a public official is appointed, they are in a space and they're in a position where they can seriously abuse that position of power to illicitly enrich themselves. An asset declaration allows a level of transparency that allows us to try and avoid that and try and keep these officials in check. Asset declarations allows us to also cross-check with a variety of different other databases. So for example, Sri Lanka is expecting what we call a beneficial ownership register, where it allows you to track and identify who the final owner of a company is. When databases like this, along with asset declarations, come into place, it really makes it much easier to hold officials accountable, to take forward investigations, to make sure that investigations don't come to a halt. And then, speaking of other laws that we're expecting, especially the Proceeds of Crime Act, which is a law for asset recovery, to bring back all the money that has been siphoned out of Sri Lanka, to institute processes to bring those back. And all that starts with investigations. And having public access to asset declarations is a huge tool in even the implementation of those laws, which are integral in terms of getting our money back, getting our stolen money back. As we know, we are in a reform moment in Sri Lanka, and this has been mainly marked by a civil society governance diagnostic report that was done with TISL and other civil society members. Subsequently, a governance diagnostic report was done by the IMF of Sri Lanka as well. Both of these reports highlighting the essential need for reform. And a priority area identified in both was the need for an asset declaration system, and a system for public officials to provide asset declarations, and the second part being those declarations to be publicly accessible. Who has to declare the assets and liabilities? There's an extensive list that's stipulated by the Act, but this includes the President, the Prime Minister, members of Parliament, governors, high-ranking officials of the Triforces. The list is quite extensive, but these are the positions that this sort of tool addresses. Secondly, what has to be disclosed in terms of assets and liabilities. So these officials elected and appointed who are stipulated as in the Act have to declare their own assets and liabilities. They have to declare the assets and liabilities of their spouses. They have to declare the assets and liabilities of their dependent children and of anyone living, cohabiting in their house within 6 months of said declaration. That there must be a centralized electronic system where these asset declarations are published, and this is supposed to be done by the CIABOC, which is the Commission to investigate allegations of bribery or corruption. When do these assets and liabilities need to be submitted by public officials? As per the Anti-Corruption Act, the declarations of assets and liabilities need to be submitted within 3 months of entering office, annually, within 14 days of leaving office, and whenever there's a significant change to an official an official's wealth. So a significant increase in wealth or decrease in wealth during the tenure, and at any point in time that isn't otherwise stipulated, they have to report it, and they have to let the central authority, which is CIABOC, know. The other time in which it's required to present these asset declarations is when you are submitting your nomination papers. So if you are a candidate for any election, upcoming election, and you are submitting your nominations, then you have to also submit your asset declarations along with that. Now that brings us to a key concern in the Anti-Corruption Act that has to do with asset declarations, and that's specifically in Section 90 of the Act actually, which stipulates non-compliance, stipulates a consequence of non-compliance for election candidates if they don't present their asset declarations. So the concern here is that it does not stipulate any penalties, and it does not stipulate any consequences or sanctions for non-compliance with this specific requirement of providing asset declarations, which is a major concern that TISL has had with the Anti-Corruption Act in terms of its implementation, in making sure that election candidates also provide asset declarations. There is no centralized electronic system as of right now, and in the meantime, as a temporary measure, the CIABOC is implementing a portal on their own website where they're uploading asset declarations, and where people can then log in, they can enter their NIC, their phone number, and email address, among other details, and enter into portal and then access the uploaded asset declarations. The issues in terms of implementation of this temporary system is twofold. Firstly, in terms of the redactions of the asset declarations, redactions are essentially what is allowed to be blacked out, what is allowed, information that is allowed to not be publicly accessible, such as the resident addresses of public officials, such as bank account numbers, right, for the privacy of data privacy of that particular official. The law specifies certain things that can be redacted, like other bank deposits, safety deposits boxes, for example. So the issue here is that CIABOC has gone above and beyond the law in terms of redactions and redacted bank account balances, including the dates in which the bank accounts have been opened. Now, this directly contradicts with the purpose of having asset declarations, the spirit of this part of the law, in terms of being an accountability tool. So the second part of the problem in terms of implementation of this system, this temporary system that's going on right now, is the requirement for email addresses and a Sri Lankan phone number to be able to access this portal that has asset declarations, right? So the issue with this is that requiring an email address also is assuming a certain level of digital literacy that is probably not uniform across the island, and thus restricting access to certain areas and certain parts of the island that digital literacy isn't as high as those parts where email addresses are common. The other issue is the requirement of a Sri Lankan phone number. And now the issue with this is that even Sri Lankans living abroad who very much have a right to access these won't be able to access it. Organizations who work on transnational crime, who work to curb money laundering, to work to curb illicit financial flows across the world, they won't have access to these asset declarations, which is an essential tool in investigations pertaining to these issues. And organizations as a whole actually are quite restricted in terms of access, because it requires an individual's national identity card number, when it's actually organizations working on anti-corruption or working on money laundering, working on proceeds of crime and asset recovery. These are organizations that span across the globe. This is coordination that is needed across the globe. And when access to a vital tool for these investigations and these processes is so restricted, it defeats the purpose of having such an accountability mechanism, having such a tool that will help us in fighting corruption, in curbing illicit enrichment.